Thank you, Saurabh. I'm grateful to ANAD, RGF, and the National Movement Front for this opportunity. And I congratulate them for organizing this very important event. As Bajpai ji said, that it is not only the Nehru's legacy that is being questioned, it is the question of our national movement, it is the questioning of the result of the national movement, the constitution, that is happening on a very massive scale. And I totally agree with you that with him, that the best example of that has been the RSS chief's claim that true independence came only with the consecration of the Ram temple. And while saying that, he made two further comments. He said that it is happening after several centuries of oppression and of enemy attack. So the enemy has been defined. The messaging is very important of what the RSS chief has said. That not only independence comes with the temple, but the enemy is identified because it has happened for 500 years, like our Prime Minister keeps saying. Even at the consecration of the temple, the Prime Minister said that 500 years of injustice has now been removed. And here also independence is coming after hundreds of years. After all, British rule was here only for 200 years. So the enemy that is being identified is clearly is clarified, is the Muslim. And as I'm fond of saying, that the RSS chief has even done better than the starlet Kangana Rao, who said that we got independence only in 2014 with the coming of Modi. And now he has, and she said that the independence we got in 1947 was, वो तो हमें भीख में दी गई थी. So with one sleight of hand, from Dadabhai Naoroji to Tilak to Gandhi, NEHRU'S, Patel, Bhagat Singh, all of them have been turned into beggars. So after all, what we got in 47 was just जो भीख में मांगी दी गई थी. And she said that Congress was an extension of the British. In other words, independence तब नहीं आई थी. Now these are all very important statements that are being made with the patronage of the current state, because after all, Kangana Rao got promoted for this great wisdom and is now a BJP MP on a BJP ticket. The Hindu communal forces promote their narrow sectarian majoritarian views, claiming to draw inspiration from a great ancient past, the golden age. I mean, this constant reference to Mother of India being Mother of Democracy and all the great scientific breakthroughs that we made in the ancient past, and by some strange magic which we all forgot, mainly because probably the Muslims came into the picture, and then now we have to reinvent all those great scientific breakthroughs. I'm making a reference to this, that they're making a reference to our ancient past. Interestingly, Nehru, Gandhi, and the Indian national movement also draw upon our ancient and medieval past. But they draw completely different values from that past. I'll make some, as a historian, I would like to make some references to what they draw from and what are the consequences of their drawing from the Indian past in the making of modern India, the making of the nature of the national movement, as well as the making of the post-independence modern India. The values that Nehru and the national movement draw from our ancient past are values of reason, rationality. Professor Mahalakshmi has given a scholarly lecture on this, the existence of the elements of reason, rationality, tolerance, secularism, a scientific bent of mind, a dialogical tradition, the spirit of living with difference, all of which actually constitute the very heart of what we call today democracy. Our nationalist leaders draw from this past. It is no longer sustainable to hold the Eurocentric view that it is with the coming of the Enlightenment in Europe that these modern ideas of reason, rationality, etc. came to us, came to the sort of the colonial peoples all over the world. No longer is this a sustainable view. There is now a clear understanding that there are indeed alternate routes to modernity, and some of these alternate routes are indeed superior to the Enlightenment route to modernity, and that is what I will try to argue today, that how by drawing from a certain drawing from our past, the Indian national movement and Nehru did make a transition to modernity which was superior to the one that was attempted in Europe. The Indian nationalists undoubtedly drew from the powerful trends globally emanating from the European Enlightenment, including the rising left and from Marxism. But they also drew from India's past traditions, and I mentioned them, reason, rationalities, etc., and drew a historical linkage with it. I will not, because we are particularly short of time, repeat a lot of things that Professor Mahalakshmi has mentioned, except just to make the argument, repeat a few points. And not only does Nehru draw from the Indus Valley civilization onwards through the Rig Veda, as he said, the questioning spirit even in the original hymn of the Rig Veda, which has both aspects of monism and atheism in it, is quite a remarkable achievement of our ancient thinkers. And from the Upanishads, what Nehru draws is lack of dogma, a scientific method, a tendency towards monism, towards synthesis, discouragement of magic and the supernatural, all this Talibajana stuff, rituals, ceremonies, and all that. And he says that overall, there is an atmosphere of tolerance, reasonableness, free thought in matters of faith, and a desire and capacity, I'm quoting him, to live and let live. He repeatedly talks of a dialogical tradition, the tradition of debate, tark in ancient India. He describes how universities in Banaras, the method they would have of teaching would be that you bring the teacher and students all together and they sit down, and what they do is not somebody giving a lecture, but they do tark, they do argument. Now this is very much something that I'll return to in a moment again. Again, he draws from the Ramayana, Mahabharata, the Gita, an ethical living, unity in complexity, an aspect that Professor Mahalakshmi mentioned. This is an important aspect of our parts, accepting diversity and still seeing a unity in it, tolerance of difference, of contradictory beliefs, and most importantly, no monopoly on truth. Nobody has a monopoly on truth. And also the notion of truth and non-violence. These are there from our very ancient past. Gandhiji is drawing from a tradition that we must remember that it is not emanating just out of nowhere, and certainly not from the European Enlightenment. Nehru draws a lot from Buddhism and Jainism. He points at the non-violence aspect of these two religions, but he draws many other elements from it. He says that Buddha draws from the Vedanta, Upanishads, and the materialist tradition, on which he writes quite extensively, and says he attacks superstition and priestcrafts, appeals to logic, to reason, to ethics, to caste discrimination, and most importantly, he focuses on Buddha, saying that there is no one truth. And he tells the story that how Buddha, when he's talking to his disciple, says that there are actually many thousands of other truths. I mean, I may have told you one or two. There are many thousands of other truths. More than that can be even numbered. So this notion of multiple truths is a very old tradition. And then Nehru goes on to trace this tradition of tolerance, acceptance, multiple truths, non-violence from Buddha, Ashoka, Kabir, Guru Nanak, Amir Khusro, Alauddin Khilji, and particularly Akbar. A tradition, and as you are aware that, I'm very fond of telling this story of which was written by this German economic historian Dietmar Rothermund. He did an amazing comeback in the 16th century, before the European Enlightenment by several decades. And he comes to this conclusion. He shows that while Akbar is talking of reason, rationality, tolerance, universal peace, the rights of women, freedom of thought, and he is in fact organizing institutional debates in his court between all religions, including atheists. And this is what is happening in the so-called backward part of the world, whereas in Spain, this is exactly this period under Philip II. There is the Spanish inquest in which tens of thousands were murdered in the name of religious heresy. So it is this tradition in India that Nehru is drawing from, and he says that this tradition led to a synthesis and assimilation and absorption and an intermixing in all aspects of life, including in art, architecture, language, literature, etc. And he gives this beautiful example of Amir Khusro and says that nowhere in the world, perhaps, poetry written in 700 years ago, roughly 700 years ago, in a dialect of Hindi, is sung till to date across the subcontinent from Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan by people across religions without ever raising the question who wrote it and what was his religion. All of you know, for example, Nehru doesn't give this example, but there are so many examples of Khusro's songs, but one of the most popular ones is Chhap Tilak Chini Tore Naina Milaike. Who hasn't heard it? Who hasn't sung it in large parts of this subcontinent? It is this organic process through which the Indian people over a long period of time that I'm in very brief summarizing, negotiated differences between religion, between castes, between multiple languages, that is brutally interrupted by the colonial intervention. The colonial intervention freezes these differences and in fact it exacerbates them. And the main instruments in their hands for exacerbating these differences were the communal forces and the casteist forces. To resist this catastrophic rupture, indeed the rupture was catastrophic, brought about by colonialism, the national movement tries to draw strength from our own civilizational ethos. And their facts and their efforts resonated with the masses. That the fact that their effort resonated with the masses had a lot to do with the existence of this ethos in our civilizational values. So it is not an accident that the national movement picks on these and these values get reflected. Now this has been thought about. What I'm saying is people like Amartya Sen, for example, in two outstanding works, The Idea of Justice and The Argumentative Indian, asks this question that how is it that India is a democracy and a whole large parts of the other parts of the post-colonial world is not? And part of the answer that he tries to give is not confined to the national movement which fought for a democratic India, but also what was our civilizational past. In other words, what Amartya Sen is doing is expounding on exactly the same things that Nehru said. Let me just summarize what Sen is saying. Sen is talking about, the existence of a dialogical tradition, a questioning mind, the ability to live with difference, the ability to assimilate from ancient times onwards and through the medieval period. And he also focuses on Akbar, and he sees these as being critical in the acceptance and success of the democratic idea among the Indian people. He too questions the notion that democracy is a Western notion with European American origins, though the latter had much to do with the specific institutional form that it actually took in many parts of the world. I would like to add towards the end that the specific historical evolution of the Indian civilization was not simply an aid, something which helped Gandhi, Nehru, and the national movement for struggling for independence and move towards modernity. It was not just an instrument. It had a major impact, as I said in the beginning, on the nature of the transformation that we see. How does that happen? The absence of a notion of transcendental truth, that there is this final objective truth that you can achieve, and the possibility of multiple truths, of multiple paths to the seeking of truth, kept the door open for a dialogical tradition, and for Gandhiji particularly, philosophically, the door open for non-violence. Gandhiji did not choose non-violence simply because it was the best strategy to fight the British, which it of course was. He chose non-violence because of this understanding that nobody can claim the ultimate truth. And if you do not have the ultimate truth with you, on what basis can you imagine that the other person also does not have the truth? And so therefore you do not have the right to extinguish or obliterate or kill anybody else. The Enlightenment in Europe did not follow that path. Therefore, for the national movement, non-violence and acceptability of difference was a critical part, not so in Europe. And that is why you see that the French, the Russian, the Chinese, all these revolutions all ended up with violence at the end of it, with civil wars following it. The means used to achieve the end distorted the end in itself. And this insistence, therefore, by Gandhiji and the national movement on keeping the correct means, choosing the non-violent path, otherwise the end itself would be distorted, had a critical impact on the nature of the Indian national movement. The Indian transition to modernity in overthrowing colonialism and building a modern Indian state, keeping non-violence as a principle, thus was seen as being much closer to the Enlightenment values than the European transition to modernity. A philosopher, historian called Tad Graham Fernie has argued this very forcefully, compares the European transition to modernity with India, Turkey, and Iran, and he comes to the conclusion that probably India's transition to modernity actually comes closest to the values of the Enlightenment, of reason, rationality, democracy, etc. And he calls the ethic of reconciliation as mass movement is what Gandhiji adopted. And he says Nehru's effort was at building the independent Indian state with the ethic of reconciliation in nation making. Now I want to make a few remarks on this. Nehru's great achievement in establishing the democratic principle in the independent Indian state must be highlighted. Nehru had an absolute non-negotiable faith in a democratic system, which he refused, in his own words, to give up for anything, however laudable the objective. It is this insistence which enabled him to build what has been called the Nehruvian consensus in state building. That is the, Indian, we do not appreciate sufficiently the fact that India's revolution was probably the only revolution, the Indian national revolution, which was not followed by a civil war. From France, China, Russia, revolutions were all followed by civil war, millions having been killed. This did not happen in India. And it did not happen because the path chosen by the national movement and the path chosen by Nehru for transition to modernity was influenced by the old civilizational values that they picked in India from. That of non-violence and a consensual approach towards change. So we didn't have the Nehruvian consensus survived and included the right and the left, right through the 50s and 60s, both sort of kicking and screaming at the same time. Both the right and the left were critiquing, but they remained part of the Nehruvian consensus, except very small marginal elements. And Nehru too responded by not pushing his own agenda, whatever his own thinking was, beyond a point, much to the chagrin at that time of the left, or of a section of the left, who wanted Nehru to push through, use his popularity to bulldoze through progressive policies. And Nehru refused to do so unless he could carry a whole overwhelming majority of people with them, because he was following, as I said, a very different approach to transition to modernity. And as you know, that Nehru himself, who was a Marxist, who was deeply influenced by Marxism as early as the 1920s, was one of the first, along with Gramsci, to break away from what has been described as Stalin Marxism. Once he sees that what distortions of Marxism could occur under Stalin, he breaks away from that, and he theorizes that there is no socialism without democracy. There is no socialism without the consent of 90% of the people. There is no such thing as the dictatorship of the proletariat. He does this about 40 or 50 years before the Euro-communist movement, or in fact the communist movement the world over, begins to accept these principles. It is this which enabled Nehru to create this unique model. I describe it as the unique model in world history, and Nehru says, with no guidance from history, to make the transition to modernity and industrialism with democracy and sovereignty intact. It doesn't happen anywhere else. No slavery, no forced collectivization, no suppression of trade union movements, no enclosures, no forced land tax, and no junior partnership of a superpower. Even the post-colonial countries which did make the transition to modernity, apart from India, many of them, the East Asian countries are a good example, they did so without democracy and as junior partners of the United States. Now, Nehru built this very painstakingly. So this is, I would say, one of the main achievements of Nehru, to build the modern Indian state with democracy and sovereignty. And I will just take 2 or 3 minutes, Saurabh, to finish and mention 2 or 3 other things that Nehru does to painstakingly create and imbibe into the Indian society the various institutions of democracy, all of which, as you are aware, are under attack today. First and foremost, civil liberties and the free press. The 1931 Karachi resolution of the Indian National Congress, which as you know is the predecessor really of the basic values of the Indian Constitution, was drafted by Nehru. It was moved by Gandhiji, and very interestingly, when Sardar Patel was the president of that Congress. So there was a unanimity in the national movement on this principle, in which one of the important rights that the 1931 Karachi resolution asserts is the right to free expression of opinion, the right to free association and combination, the right to assembly peacefully. Now, all of these are denied. You cannot even hold a peaceful meeting in the national capital today, if you want to, at your own choice, as was discovered when the G20 was happening. And in Harkishan Singh Surjit Bhavan, which is a private space of the CPM, a meeting questioning the G20 could not occur. I think Jairam Ramesh was one of the people who was either caught inside or prevented from going inside by the police. The police came and disrupted that meeting. So these simple freedoms are no longer there. The free press is less we talk about it. We rank among the lowest in the world, worse than Russia or just about close to Russia in the freedom of free press, etc. Nehru was the chief force behind the Civil Liberties Union. He formed it in 1936. He persuaded Tagore to become the honorary president and Sarojini Naidu the functioning chairperson. I'm mentioning this just to say that the spread of the ideas in among the various levels of people, reference was made to it that political leaders at that time, having a direct dealing with the tallest of the poets and getting them to work with each other, it is so amazing. Similarly, during his tenure in office as Prime Minister, Nehru encouraged a free press, even when it was severely critical of him. There were no cartoonists who had to go to jail even before they cracked the joke, as happens today. Nehru's disrespect for the parliament, the respect for the opposition in parliament is legendary. And as he says, at the peak of his popularity, I'm quoting him, "I do not want India to be a country in which millions of people say yes to one man. I want a strong opposition," as if he knew what was going to happen in the future. Now, on the other hand, the call of one man's name, you must have heard it repeatedly, Modi, Modi. It drowns out opposition. The moment there is any opposition, you get the name of one man. So as I said, Nehru was, prescient. He was predicting this. And the one man himself calls for Congress Mukt and an opposition Mukt Bharat. The person with the love of music, can you hear it outside, please? किसी का चल रहा है, कोई कौन गाना सुन रहे हैं बैठ के, ये सबको इंटरप्ट किया है. मिनिमम सिविलिटी. ये 2-3 बार ही हुआ है. So, we are now facing a system which is asking for mukti from the opposition, from Andolan Jivis, from left liberal intellectuals, from poets, disruptionists like Bajpai ji and so many others, urban Naxals and what have you. Nehru tried to create an independent judiciary, bureaucracy, police service, etc., which are all, as you know, deeply compromised. I'm not going to talk about this. I only want to emphasize one aspect, having been a teacher all my life, his insistence on free academic institutions as being critical in the functioning of a democracy. And as Abha so effectively demonstrated that this is being dismantled, this academic freedom in the universities is dismantled. I want to just quote you a para from Nehru on what he thinks a university should be and why it is important. He says, a university stands for humanism, for tolerance, for reason, for the adventure of ideas, and the search for truth. If universities discharge their duty adequately, he says, then it is well with the nation and the people. And then, as if anticipating once again the current situation, he says, but if the temple of learning itself becomes a home of narrow bigotry or petty jealousies, how then will a nation prosper or a people grow in stature? Today, the temple of learning have indeed become a home of narrow bigotry.
This is happening in my own university, Jawaharlal Nehru University, the premier university of the country. Our students are being put in jail for asking questions. My own student Omar Khalid is in jail for the last 4 years. Our faculty is being harassed, their pensions not being granted for simply participating in a silent march. Our syllabi is being distorted. Pressure is being put to teach certain things and not other things, and so on and so forth. It is as if a lesson had been learnt from what Hitler did to Frankfurt University, the premier university of that country. The manner in which he decimated that university, we find something similar is being attempted as if from a textbook with our own university, the number one university of this country. Taking into account all that I have just said, I do hope you realize that we do need to revisit urgently Nehru's legacy. Thank you.